Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our second session this afternoon of Local Hero, Global Hero. And first of all, I have to start with a piece of housekeeping, which is that this bag was left upstairs. Would the honourable owner please step forward and collect? See, if this had been British Airways, it would have been blown up, or Manchester United. And this was, excuse me, this was with you? Not, okay, good. Fine. Well, that's very satisfactory.
Well done.
Huh? So I now have the great privilege of interviewing Prue Leith for a quarter of an hour or 3 hours, actually, whose career has been extraordinary, and who I first encountered when we were fellow restaurateurs in London in the 1980s. And you had Leith's and I had L'Escargot.
Oh, absolutely. A long time ago.
It was a long time ago. And you were in Notting Hill.
I was. And you know, Nick, I was thinking this whole session is sort of got an overview of, you know, local hero and local goods and organic and how important food is and where ingredients come. Do you know, when I opened my restaurant, the only reason I got amazing publicity was because I was the only woman with a sort of serious restaurant at the time. Nobody, and people would say, it's fantastic, all the vegetables are fresh. And the only reason I had fresh vegetables was I couldn't afford a freezer. I mean, absolutely, I wasn't thinking, you've got to have the right ingredients and you've got to do this. I just didn't think of anything else. I didn't have any other idea how to do it. And yet, at the time,
and your restaurant opened in?
69,
right.
1969. And at the time, even really smart restaurants like the Savoy Grill would have tin celery hearts. Do you remember tin celery hearts? And tinned French asparagus, you know, the big fat white ones, which I have to say I still love. But they could have had Evesham asparagus or Cork asparagus. Fresh, but they had the posh tinned ones. Anyway, things changed, thank goodness.
But it gave you your opportunity.
It did. And I was very lucky. But I mean, a lot of it was to do with the fact that I was a woman and quite young. I was 29 when I opened Leith's. And actually, it was a question of fools rushing in because I'd never worked in a restaurant. And I just thought, because I figured I could cook, and I loved cooking, and I wanted, like most people who open restaurants, behind it, they want to feed people, don't they? It's all about, you want to give people pleasure and you want to see them eating. And so I thought, it can't be that difficult. I mean, I was already doing catering. I thought, well, it's just like having a big event every night. It turned out to be a little bit more difficult. In fact, I had this idea that when I opened my restaurant, I would wear very elegant clothes and long earrings, and I'd hire a very good chef, and then I'd walk around the restaurant and take all the compliments and dish out brandies to favorite guests, you know.
How long did that dream last? That
dream lasted about less than one night, because I spent the first night that the restaurant was open in the ladies' loo with a plunger unblocking the laundry. So that dispelled that dream.
And I heard the interview with you this morning on RTE Radio, which you said that a lot of what you've done has been due to the fact that you're greedy.
Yeah. Well, I think that's how I got into food, because I was in Paris as a student. And I think it's hard to be in Paris, well, it was in the 60s, very hard to be in Paris and not eat good food all the time, because the street food was good, and even a jambon sans jambon tasted absolutely amazing to me. And so, but because I couldn't afford to open a restaurant, I had to go into catering, because catering is, you can start it with a frying pan in one hand and a wooden spoon in the other, and you're a cook for hire. You just go and cook where everybody asks you to. And so that's how I started. And then, of course, I got quite good at that, and that grew. And then I opened a restaurant.
But there's one quote that I got from the little research we did, because I thought I knew you so well that I didn't need to do that much. Which was, so I went to Cordon Bleu in London and learnt to cook. I wish my father had lived to see that I finally did stick at something.
Oh, well, that's because until I got to cooking, I had been to Cape Town University to learn to be an actress because my mother was an actress. I grew up in South Africa, and it never occurred to anybody that a privileged white South African, well-to-do family would send their daughter into the kitchen. You know, that was for black people. And we had a very good cook. We had a wonderful cook called Charlie, who was Zulu. But it never occurred to me that I could learn to cook in the kitchen with him, at his apron string. So I went to Cape Town to be an actress. I was useless at that, so then I went to art school, and I remember the director of the art school saying to me, "What are you doing in my life class?" And I said, "Well, I'm learning to draw because I want to do stage design." And he said, "Well, I'd give up now if I was you." And I mean, you can't do that today. You have to be encouraging to people, students. Well, anyhow, he saved my father a lot of money and me a lot of anguish because out I went. Then I went to architecture school, then I just tried to do a BA. Then I decided I wanted to learn French, and I went to the Sorbonne because I thought I'd be an interpreter. And then finally I decided, actually, I want to learn to be a cook. By which time, my father was getting a little tired. I was now nearly 21, and I'd left school at 18, you know. Yeah. It was taking me a long time.
And you weren't married either?
No, and I didn't get married. I didn't get married till I was 34, and that was actually a huge help, because I really do believe that husbands and children slow you down. I mean, there's no question they do. And also, it meant that I could work at night and in weekends. And so I just got on with my business. That was great. And then, you know what? When you're 34, 33, there's this little thing starts saying to you, "You want to have a baby?" Anyway, then I did. And then I slowed down completely, because then I had 2 little babies, one adopted, and one homemade, one off the shelf. And
this is turning into some very politically incorrect exercise.
No, they were absolutely brilliant. My daughter's Cambodian. They're both 42 now, and they're fantastic. But for that first 10 years, if you look at a graph at my business, it was going on very terrifically, and then it all just sort of stayed steady for 10 years. But the great thing about if you're self-employed is if you get your business under your belt before you have your children and husbands, then you can afford to slow down for 10 years and then pick it up again when they go to school. Lovely.
Yeah.
Well, I was very lucky.
So it's proved. Yeah. And on the topic of local hero, global hero, do you think that any other profession other than cooking could have made you into such a global hero?
Oh, absolutely not. I don't know that I'm a global hero, but certainly I couldn't have had the success I did, because at the time, I don't think it's quite so true now, but people thought that cooking was for dummies. So I was perfectly confident in going into cooking, because I thought I was quite clever. And so I thought, well, I can do that, because, even dumb people can cook. And actually, the wonderful thing about cooking is we need every kind of person. We just need people who care about food. It doesn't matter how clever you are. It helps if you become, managing director of something huge. But if you are not academic, but you are prepared to learn the skills of your hands, you can go very far as a cook.
If you have enthusiasm as well.
Yeah, and if you care about it. And it's interesting, because when I said when I started, I didn't, I had no thought of it has to be organic, has to be perfect. My obsession for food grew with my knowledge. As I got better and better at it, I got more and more keen on learning how to do things right, and learning from other people, and getting the right ingredients. And I think over the years I've sort of, I wouldn't say I had anything so grand as a philosophy, but I do believe that you have to care about what you do. You have to want it to be easily understood. And so I like simple food. I like unmessed around food. And of course, over the fashions. I mean, I've lived so long, Nick, much longer than you, that I can actually remember when we decorated absolutely everything with swirls of mayonnaise and cream and stuff. And that fashion just disappeared gradually. And then we had Nouvelle Cuisine, and we had all these different things. But I think at each time, I've been keen to understand what the next lot of people are doing. And I think it's fascinating what people are doing with cooking now. And people like me with no real, I mean, I hadn't gone to chef school. I did go to the Cordon Bleu, which was a very good school. anybody can jump into food. And it's given me a career, lots of careers. I mean, I've written a lot of cookbooks, I've had restaurants, I've had huge, big catering business, and opened a cookery school. Just before Ballymaloe did, I think with a pair of us are the oldest, schools in the English-speaking world, which is both mine is still going strong.
That's the one in Pretoria?
That's the one in London.
Oh, right, London.
The one in London is called Prue Leith School of Food and Wine.
Right.
And the one in Pretoria is called the Prue Leith Chef's Academy.
Right.
And it has a restaurant and stuff attached to it. But so I had, all that, and then I started, because I found, to my surprise, that I really loved business. I mean, I had gone into cooking in a way because I thought work in an office would be boring. And in fact, my only experience of an office I was a temporary typist for the health department, and I did that for 3 weeks and got sacked. And so I realized that perhaps offices were not what I should be doing. And yet, as soon as you've got 4 or 5 people working for you, you are in an office because you're doing, you're making up the orders, you're talking to the customers, you're doing the bills, you're doing the menus, you're, negotiating the deals, and I loved it. And then I discovered that there is just as much joy in a profit and loss sheet with the right number at the bottom, in the right color,
with black ink.
As there is in setting out a perfect buffet or something. And it's the same buzz of sort of egotism, really. It's that feeling of, we did that. We pulled it off. It's great. And so I became that I really love business. And because I was good at it, I got invited to sit on all these fancy boards, and I hit that moment when none of the big PLCs like Whitbread or Woolworths or Safeway had women on their boards, and they thought they ought to, because they got tired of being lectured by women at AGMs who said, you're a supermarket. Why have you got 12 grey suits on this board when all your customers are women and 3/4 of your staff are women? Why aren't there women on the board? And they got tired of that, so they started looking around for women. And there were a bunch of about 20 of us women at the time who had some kind of business profile. And so we got offered all the jobs. And so I got lots of these jobs, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I ended up, this was a big mistake. I ended up on the Halifax Bank board. And I realized that I'd bitten off too much, that I'd bitten off more than I could chew, when I finally plucked up the courage in a board meeting to say, look, I'm sorry, guys, but I don't know what we're talking about here. What is a derivative?
And nobody knew the answer.
Nobody knew the answer. Yeah. And the guy next to me, who was also on the board, said, don't you worry your pretty little head about that. He said, we have people who do understand these things.
I don't think anybody knew the answer.
And that was the moment I thought I have to leave. And I did leave, and I'm jolly glad I left, because otherwise I'd be tarred with that brush. Yeah. Anyway, so then I got into business, and because I was in business and enthusiastic about that, I started to get interested in charity stuff, and so I started starting charities. I'm an inveterate starter of stuff. And so I started a restaurant that would train young people who were homeless and often on the streets, and who were at the bottom of the heap, really, and try and make them into waiters and baristas and cooks. And that was hugely satisfying. And then I started Focus on Food, which is a charity which is still going strong. And basically, in those days, we had big pantechnicons, and we went round schools and taught primary school children and their teachers how to cook. And I was banging on government doors, trying to get the government to realize how important it was that children learn to eat and learn to cook. And I still think that's the most. And then I got a job as the chairman of the School Food Trust, which was a government quango set up in the wake of Jamie Oliver's intervention with his school dinners on telly. And for 40 years I'd been trying to get government to move on this subject, and been patted on the head and nobody taking any notice. And lots of other cooks were too, lots of other restaurateurs and cooks were trying to get food taken seriously in schools. And mostly they just said, you do your charitable stuff, it's very good. But they wouldn't give us any money, and they wouldn't put it on the curriculum and so on. And then Jamie, first program of school dinners, Tony Blair rang up Ruth Kelly, who was then the Minister of Education in England, and said, I never want to see another program like that. What do we do about it? And she said, we can't do anything about it as long as schools are allowed to sell junk to children in schools. We have to change the law. Thank God for Ruth Kelly. And so they set up this quango, which I chaired, and we changed what children can eat in schools, and taught the dinner ladies how to cook, because of course they just knew how to open packets. Well, a lot of them could cook. But they were, even the ones who could cook, only cooked old-fashioned food because they were the older generation who could suet puddings and custard. So I really thought that was the most important job I've ever had. And, it never comes up in my, nobody ever says to me, what's the most important job? Teaching children to cook was me. So you see, I actually think that good food could save the world.
Yeah. And the one elephant in the room that has preoccupied you a lot as well is the training of professional chefs. And the more interested we are in eating well, the more acute the shortage of trained chefs are. And you've faced up to that in London and South Africa.
And in South Africa, especially in South Africa, I felt that we were really filling a huge gap, because tourism was growing so fast in South Africa, but the massive population had no money to go to cookery school. So we set up a school, which is actually a paying school, but it goes with a lot of bursaries and help for people who can't afford it. And I really feel proud now when I go around South Africa, because a lot of people have my name on their backs, on their jacket. It does feel fantastic when you recognize the front of the jacket, and you say, turn around, and it says, Prue Leith Chef's Academy on the back. It feels terrific. Anyway, I reckon, and also, one of the reasons it's so difficult to get chefs is because the industry grows so fast. I mean, in spite of the fact that food is so much better than it used to be. I mean, we'd all agree that, a sandwich can be an absolute joy. Food is just fantastically better. And yet, it's very difficult to get chefs. And one of the reasons is that there are still as many, as 40 years ago, more restaurants go bust than any other business other than builders. Little builders set up and go bust, and little restaurants set up, or big restaurants set up and go bust. So a lot of restaurants explode and bust. And let's face it, if you're not, when I started in life, I wasn't mad about food. I was just greedy. I liked it, but I wasn't as obsessed as I am now. You don't have to be that passionate, but if you're choosing between going to work for Tesco and going to work in a kitchen, and you think that in Tesco you'll get a career path, reasonable hours, every second weekend off, a bunny mate, and a complaints procedure and all that stuff, you might think that would be better than going into a restaurant and getting what I shall rather rudely call the Gordon Ramsay School of Management, the F word a lot and being shouted at. But actually, thank God that is finally changing. I mean, when we started, there was hardly a restaurant that didn't behave badly. There was a huge initiation stuff going on. Kids were being dumped in stock pots, locked in fridges, teased, bullied. And that's no way to encourage more people into the industry. But it is changing now. And again, it's changing largely because telly makes it cool to cook. It's cool to cook now.
It's cool to cook. Well, on that note, thank you very much, Prue.
Thank you.